Picture this. When the Israelites were fleeing Egypt, Pharaoh and his army chasing them from behind, they crossed safely through the Sea of Reeds, and the Torah reports that Miriam led the women dancing with timbrels. The text reads, Miriam the prophet, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with timbrels and flutes. Many a Friday night here at Micah, we sing, and the women dancing with their timbrels. And our sages ask a fundamental question. From where did the Israelites get timbrels in the desert? Now, think about it for just a minute. Where did those timbrels come from? You're packing up your whole life in an attempt to escape oppression as quickly as possible. You can't take much, so you pack your tambourine? I don't think so. Making instruments takes time. That means that during Egyptian captivity, before seeing the shocking slaying of the firstborn or the wondrous parting of the sea, during the dark hour of oppression, these women played the long game, banked on the hope of liberation, believed that it was coming, and prepared for it painstakingly by fashioning tambourines in their spare enslaved time. The sages teach us that the timbrel was in fact a symbol of hope, a glimmer of what could possibly be. A glimmer of freedom, liberation, joy, connection, the promised land. The rabbis explain that the women of that generation were confident that God was doing miracles for them, so they brought out timbrels from Egypt. They maintained a glimmer of hope. And you know what I think? That's one hell of a framing for an enslaved people. The picture you see on the screens behind me was drawn by William Eli Hill in 1915. It's entitled, My Wife and Mother-in-Law. Now, which do you see? Do you see Hill's wife, the young woman in the picture? Or do you see his mother-in-law, who Hill may or may not have liked all that much based on how he depicted her? This picture is an example of what is known in art psychology as an ambiguous figure. A great deal of research examines how the brain turns the patchy deluge of stimuli bombarding the retina into a coherent, three-dimensional mental representation of the world. I know you're still trying to see the one you didn't see first, right? I'll give you a minute. Ambiguous figures are interesting because they are thought to be a strong example of exactly the sort of ambiguity that the brain deals with moment to moment. Two viewers can look at the same image and see totally different things. Now, why does our mind work this way? Why do some of us see one thing and others another? Sports psychologist Emily Saul calls this framing. Saul teaches that the way in which we experience anything is deeply influenced by the story that we tell about it. How we experience something on an emotional level is influenced by the frame that we use. The frame is what we use to make meaning of things, to make sense of what we experience. Now, psychology poses that the two most common frames that we encounter are reactive and intentional. What's the difference? With a reactive frame, our response to most challenging or unexpected things is with an, oh, no. immediately, the fear response system turns on to start protecting us from this very bad thing. Our state of being becomes critical and hyper-focused on the problem. Let's say, for example, that you're at work and you get an email from someone who's criticizing something that you've done, maybe criticizing your work on a project. The reactive response invites anger. Before even thinking about it, you shoot off a really angry email back. Or you might find that you start questioning your own self-worth. Oh my God, this means I'm a failure at my job. You might even start leaning into imposter syndrome. Maybe you even quit. Those are all examples of the reactive frame. Intentional framing begins with a response like this. Okay, this is normal, understandable. An intentional frame allows for the idea that you might not like the feedback, but you're okay. You're open to there being unexpected value to it, as well as challenge. Your fear response system is off because you don't perceive this as a threat. The intentional frame allows you to be open, curious, creative, problem-solving, and most importantly, to do so with compassion for yourself and others rather than with criticism. How we see things is often a matter of what we notice, what catches our attention. But even that phrase, catches our attention, grabs our eye, turns our head, those are all passive, reactive actions. What we notice, what we see, those are active, intentional actions. We have to train ourselves to see certain things and not others, to notice some things while disregarding or giving little concern to others. I recently heard this term, it's called a glimmer, which is essentially the opposite of a trigger. Now, trigger, we all know triggers. That word has become a commonplace term in our cultural lexicon, but few people know about the opposite of triggers, which are glimmers. This phrase, or this word, glimmer, was coined by Deb Dana, a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in complex trauma. Glimmers refers to the moments when our biology is in a place of connection or regulation. When cues to our nervous system tell us to feel safe or calm. Glimmers are those micro moments in your day that make you feel joy, happiness, or gratitude or peace. And they begin to shape our system in very gentle ways. The term glimmers comes from a therapeutic modality called polyvagal theory. When you pay attention, and what you pay attention to grows. Once we train our brain to be on the lookout for glimmers, the more these tiny moments begin to appear. We sometimes refer to these as moments of transcendence. Now, be honest. How many of you know someone or are related to someone, or are someone who lives from crisis to crisis, or from ache to ache, or from worry to worry? It's very Jewish, it's okay. But in Judaism, we say mitzvah goreret mitzvah. One good deed leads to another, which leads to another, and so on. Just as we practice our actions, we have to actively practice our thoughts as well. And that includes the things that we notice. And guess what? There's a prayer for that. It's called the Modim. We thank you, God, for your miracles that we experience every day, and for your wondrous deeds and favors at every time of day, morning, evening, and noon. But we don't. We don't do that. We don't notice those daily miracles and wondrous deeds. And why? Why are we so careless of noticing? The scholar Max Kadushin called the rabbis normal mystics. They were not lost in visions of another world. They were enchanted by this world. They saw God not only in sunsets, but in stones. Not only in stars, but in the functions, gross and not so gross, of the body. Commonplace things are not unmagical, but they are often unnoticed. The rabbis knew that the only limit to the miraculous in this world is the limit of our awareness. Now, the Torah is full of big, splashy, Hollywood-ready miracles. An entire sea splits in half. Pillars of cloud and fire alternate leading the community by day and night. A mountain explodes with lightning and thunder and the sound of blasting shofars. By comparison, the miracle of the burning bush, a little thorny desert shrub that smokes and smolders but strangely is not consumed, doesn't seem particularly impressive. At first glance, Moses himself doesn't even recognize the miraculous quality of what he sees. Only when he turns aside and goes in for a closer examination does he realize that he is witnessing something very extraordinary. Only then does he hear the voice of God calling his name. Rabbi Lawrence Kushner suggests that we have long misread the story of the burning bush. He writes, "The burning bush was not a miracle. It was a test. God wanted to find out if Moses was capable of paying attention to something for more than just a few minutes. There is another world hidden right here within this one whenever we pay attention," he wrote. And the rabbis teach that the burning bush was actually a thorny shrub. So why would God choose this thorny shrub? Because God says that nothing is devoid of the divine. You can't look at the thorn bush and say, ugh, it's a prickly, ugly, lowly thorn bush. It's not infused with God. And so that was Moses' first test. And he saw it. It was likely just a little bit of tinsel stuck in a thorn bush, but he took notice and he saw something unique in that desert setting. And that's the moment that God began to speak. Did you know that in Judaism, what we often refer to as angels, the Hebrew is malachim, it literally translates to messengers. Messengers can be glimmers as well. And it's on us to look for those messengers everywhere, to notice them. People whom we encounter, and they change us or teach us something about ourselves. Sometimes it's a thorn bush. Sometimes it's a person. Sometimes it's one of you. I've been your rabbi now for 18 years. I've listened to your stories. I've sat by the bedsides of your loved ones as they lost their life. I buried your parents, your spouses, sometimes your kids. Marriages have ended in my office, as have engagements. I've watched families as they say cruel, cutting things to one another, or just as devastating, refuse to say nothing at all. I've seen the iron claw of grief scrape out the inside of mourners, grip their windpipes, and blind their eyes so that they cannot accept the mercy of people or of God. And still, as the poet John Masefield wrote, I've seen flowers come to stony places. I've witnessed parents who have buried children and believe that life offers them nothing, that the world will be forever hollow, only to have another parent who has endured the same loss reach out to them and in shared grief find a new purpose together. I have seen beautiful acts of comfort and of love. I have seen families receive meals for weeks, in one case for years after a loss. I've seen one child pick up another on the sports field, and I have seen couples find their way back to one another after estrangements. I've watched parents choose love over rejection when the child is not who the parents expected or dreamed of, and seen children forgive parents when they are not who the child needed or wished for. Sometimes it seems, for those outside of faith communities, that religion is simply about a set of belief to which one assents. But I know that from the inside, from 22 years in this rabbinate, that it is about the glimmers. It's the relationships and shared vision. It's the moments of tender connection, miraculous resilience, selfless generosity. Where else do people sing together week after week? Where else does the past come alive to remind us how much has been learned before the sliver of time that we are granted in this world? Messengers, glimmers. They abound for us every day, and the way in which we frame what we experience absolutely matters. Whether or not we actually notice the glimmer or messenger depends on the frame that we bring to our life. Like Miriam and the Israelite women fleeing Egypt, you have to be ready for it with a timbrel in your hand. Western civilization is the product of two cultures, ancient Greece and ancient Israel. The Greeks believed in fate. The future is determined by the past. The Jews believed in freedom. There is no evil decree that cannot be averted. The Greeks believed that the world deserved the concept of tragedy, but Jews gave it the idea of hope. The whole of Judaism, though it would take an entire Torah, a whole book to show it, is a set of laws and narratives designed to create in people and families and communities and a nation habits that defeat despair. Judaism is the voice of hope in the conversation of humankind. Judaism is itself a glimmer. Judaism is indeed a religion of details, and it would be all too easy to miss and not notice the larger picture. See the bush, but not the flame. To flee enslavement, but leave the timbrel behind. To be a Jew is to be an agent of hope, a glimmer, a messenger in a world serially threatened by despair. Judaism is a sustained struggle, the greatest ever known, against the world that is, in the name of the world that could, should be, but is not yet. Being a rabbi can certainly be challenging. It's not your fault, don't worry. But there are far more meaningful glimmers than there are dark days. And to be Jewish, well, there is no more challenging a vocation. Throughout history, when human beings have sought hope, when they have searched for the glimmer, they have found it in our Jewish story. Judaism entreats us to recite 100 blessings a day. Don't judge yourself by your past. You don't live there anymore. As we enter this new year 5784, I invite you to seek out 100 glimmers a day, or maybe just a handful. May we be blessed to bring hope to the present by framing a future worth celebrating with timbrels in our hand. And may this serve as our shared vision and purpose for this sacred community. Shabbat Shalom. Shana Tova.